My husband looked me dead in the eye that night and said, "We don't have to love each other. We just have to survive this." His voice didn't tremble. Mine did. Because I had just learned the truth for the last 10 years. The marriage I thought was real had been nothing more than a debt repayment plan tied to my father's mistakes. I remember the cold weight of those words settling into my chest, like someone pressing a hand over my heart to silence it. 10 years. 10 years of holding his hand in public. 10 years of sharing a home, a bed, a life. 10 years of holidays, photographs, anniversaries, and quiet nights where I tried to convince myself that the small moments of gentleness between us meant something. And yet that night, standing in the middle of our living room with the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, he ripped away everything I thought was real. But maybe I should start earlier, before the resentment grew like weeds, before the silence between us stretched wide enough to divide a life. My name is Claire Reynolds, and I grew up believing that love was supposed to be simple. My parents' marriage wasn't perfect, but it was warm. My father, Daniel, was both my anchor and my storm. He made big promises, big gestures, and big mistakes. He loved us deeply, but he also gambled with money and fate in ways none of us could have predicted would destroy my future. When I was 24, fresh out of college, ready to start my life, I had no idea that my father had accumulated a private debt so massive it could have swallowed our family whole. I had never even heard the name Weston Hale, but that man would eventually become my husband, at least on paper. I first met Weston in the most unromantic place possible, an office with no windows, lit by fluorescent lights that buzzed slightly, as if annoyed by the secrets hanging in the air. He sat behind a polished mahogany desk, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. There was something about him, a calm power, a coldness wrapped in expensive suits and quiet confidence. His eyes were steady, too steady, like he was evaluating not just what I said, but what I felt. I remember twisting my fingers in my lap as he explained the situation. My father owed him a staggering amount of money my family could never repay. My father was sick at the time, too weak to speak, and my mother was barely holding herself together. I tried to swallow my anger, my fear, my humiliation. "What do you want from us?" I asked him, my voice trembling. He didn't hesitate. "Not us, just you." My stomach dropped. He slid a document across the table. "A contract? A proposal? Marry me," he said, his voice as calm as if he were asking about the weather. "For 10 years, in exchange, the debt disappears." I felt like I was drowning. "Why?" I whispered. He leaned back in his chair. "Because my family demands stability for the chair, company's image. Because I don't have the time or patience to hunt for something real. Because you fit the profile I need. And because your father's debt gives me leverage." Leverage. That's what I was to him. A solution. A tool. A name on a document that would make his life easier. I should have walked away. I should have screamed. But then I saw my father frail, sweating, terrified in my mind, and my mother's face when she realized we might lose our home, and the weight of their future pressed down on my shoulders until I couldn't breathe. I signed the contract, and just like that, I became Mrs. Claire Hale. The wedding was small, quiet, businesslike. Weston didn't smile in the photos, and I forced one because our families needed to believe this was real. For the cameras, he held my hand. For the contract, he kissed my forehead. And for the illusion, he placed a ring on my finger that felt heavier than the truth. For the first year, we lived like strangers, who shared the same air but not the same world. He worked constantly, leaving early and returning late. I stayed busy trying to build a life that felt less empty. I cooked dinners he barely touched. I folded shirts he never thanked me for. I memorized the sound of his footsteps in the hallway and pretended that meant something. But somewhere around the 3rd year, things changed. Not dramatically, not the way love does in movies, but slowly, like a frost melting in spring. He started asking about my day. He brought home takeout when I was sick. He remembered my birthday without a reminder. Sometimes, after long nights at work, he would sit beside me on the couch, exhaustion softening the edges of his usual distance, and we would watch a movie in silence, our shoulders barely touching. There were moments, fleeting, fragile moments, when I thought maybe we were becoming something real. And then the 10th year came, and with it, the truth. It happened on the night of our anniversary, an anniversary I had foolishly planned a dinner for, cooking his favorite dish, setting the table with candles, wearing the dress he once told me looked elegant on me. He walked in late, loosened his tie, and sighed when he saw the setup. Not the sigh of someone touched, but the sigh of someone tired. He sat down, ate mechanically, barely tasting anything, and when I tried to ask what was wrong, he looked up with those steady eyes and said it like it meant nothing. "The contract ends next week. We can go our separate ways." It felt like someone had cut the floor out from under me. My fork slipped from my hand. I stared at him, waiting for something, a softening, a hint of regret, anything. But he just sipped his wine. "I think we did well," he said. "Played the part convincingly. No scandals, no arguments. We did our job. Played the part, job." I felt my throat closing. 10 years of hope I should never have held on to. 10 years of pretending for a man who had never once pretended for me. And that night, sitting alone at the table, long after he went upstairs, I realized something. The contract may have been ending, but the truth was just beginning. The next morning, the house felt colder than usual, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the weight of the night before. I didn't sleep well. My mind was a chaotic storm of memories and questions. 10 years of shared life, every smile, every touch, every quiet moment in the kitchen now felt tainted by the knowledge that it had all been orchestrated, calculated. Yet, somehow, beneath the anger and the heartbreak, there was a thread of something I couldn't name. Confusion, perhaps. Or maybe a flicker of hope that the man who had seemed so cold might have been hiding more than just the contract. Weston didn't come down for breakfast. He left silently, his coat hung neatly by the door, his car already gone. I sat at the table, staring at the empty chair opposite me, and let the grief wash over me in waves. 10 years of pretending, 10 years of holding my tongue, 10 years of sacrificing my own desires to keep my family afloat, all for a man who viewed me as nothing, more than a debt repayment. And yet, I couldn't help but replay the moments that didn't make sense, the nights he stayed up worrying when my mother was ill, the time he brought soup when I had a flu, the small gestures that felt almost human. Did they mean nothing? I decided I needed answers. I needed to know if the man who had spent a decade in my life had ever truly felt anything for me, or if every touch, every word, every shared glance had been part of the arrangement. I opened the box in the attic where I had kept my father's old journals. I hadn't touched them in years, afraid of what I might find. But now, desperation pushed me forward. I sifted through the yellowed pages, reading his meticulous notes about debts, meetings, and arrangements. His handwriting was shaky in some parts, neat in others, betraying the strain of a man trying to keep everything under control. And then I found it a brief entry, written 2 months before I had signed the contract. Met with W.H. today. Agreement discussed. Claire will have a secure future. Debt removed. She will understand. The words blurred before my eyes. My father hadn't betrayed me. He had tried to protect me in the only way he knew, but it hadn't accounted for the man Weston truly was. Or perhaps it had, and I had never realized the consequences. My fingers traced the faded ink, feeling both gratitude and sorrow. My father had acted out of love, and now, years later, I was left to navigate the tangled web of obligations and emotions he had left behind. By the time Weston returned that evening, I had made a decision. I couldn't continue living in the shadow of secrets. I waited for him in the living room, my hands clenched in my lap, my heart hammering. When he stepped through the door, he paused at the sight of me, his expression carefully neutral. "Claire," he said, almost cautiously. "We don't need to. We do," I interrupted, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to talk. Now." He sighed but didn't argue, settling into the chair opposite me. There was a long pause, a weighty silence, where neither of us knew how to begin. Finally, I spoke. "I know about the contract. I know about my father. I know everything, and I need to know the truth from you." His eyes, usually so guarded, flickered briefly with something I couldn't place. Guilt? Hesitation? Fear? "Claire," he began slowly, "your father came to me first. He proposed the arrangement. I didn't seek it out. I didn't pressure you. It was your family's choice, not mine." I felt my chest tighten. "So you didn't want me? Not for 10 years?" He looked down, then back up, the faintest shadow of emotion crossing his face. "I agreed because of the agreement, because it was necessary. But I didn't expect to care about you." The words hit me like a punch. Didn't expect to care? Didn't care at first, perhaps. But over the years, the quiet moments, the small kindnesses, they weren't required by the contract. Were they? I needed to know. All the things you did, the nights you stayed up when I was sick, the times you helped me without being asked, were those part of it too? He leaned back, exhaling slowly. No, those weren't part of the contract. Those were moments I didn't plan, moments I tried to ignore, moments that shouldn't have existed. My heart caught in my throat. Shouldn't have existed? What does that mean? "It means I wasn't supposed to feel anything for you," he admitted quietly. "The contract was clear. The arrangement was clear. And yet, I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't deny the way I felt, even when I tried." For a moment, the room was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. The man who had seemed so distant, so cold, for 10 years, was now revealing cracks, showing a vulnerability I had never imagined. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of something unexpected, a possibility that maybe the man I had lived with all these years had been more than just a stranger, more than a contract, more than a convenient solution. I don't know what to say," I whispered, my voice trembling. 10 years? I gave everything, and you never said any of this." "I was afraid," he said softly. "Afraid of what it would mean if you knew. Afraid of letting you see me for what I really felt. Afraid it would make you resent me, or worse, leave you trapped in something you never wanted." The words washed over me, leaving me both angry and stunned. All those years, I had thought I was alone, that he had been indifferent. And yet, here he was, admitting that beneath the stoic exterior had been feelings, hidden and buried, constrained by duty, fear, and obligation. I took a shaky breath, trying to process the revelation. "So, what now?" I asked. "The contract ends in a week. Everything we've built, is it all just going to vanish?" He met my eyes, finally, fully, without pretense. "I don't know. I can't undo 10 years, Claire. But I don't want it to end without telling you the truth." I swallowed hard, my heart racing. For the first time in a decade, I realized the truth was not just about the contract or my father's debt. It was about the moments we had lived, the choices we had made, and the emotions we had buried beneath obligation. And as I sat there, staring at the man who had been both my partner and my stranger for 10 years, I understood something terrifying and exhilarating. Our story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The clock ticked on. Outside, the sky darkened, and the house seemed to hold its breath with me. I had no idea what the next day would bring, no idea how we would navigate the storm of truth, guilt, and buried emotion. But I knew one thing. I could no longer pretend, no longer hide behind the contract or my father's intentions. I had to confront the reality of what we had become, and whether there was a chance for anything real beneath the years of carefully constructed lies. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt the faintest stirrings of hope. The next few days were a blur of restless nights and hesitant mornings. I couldn't stop thinking about Weston's words, the way he had admitted finally that some part of him had cared. My mind replayed every interaction from the past 10 years, every fleeting touch or look I had dismissed as routine, as habit, as the obligations of a contract. And now, each memory felt heavy with new meaning. What if the moments I had treasured weren't entirely a lie? What if they had been real, hidden beneath the pretense? I avoided Weston as much as possible, pacing the house in silence, pretending to be busy with work, cooking, errands, anything to buy time to untangle my emotions. But he didn't leave me alone. He moved through the house quietly, always present, never overbearing. He asked little questions, small enough to seem casual, yet loaded with weight. Did you sleep? Have you eaten? Do you need anything? Each question was a reminder that he cared, and yet his restraint was maddening. Every gesture felt like both a promise and a warning. It was Marcus, Weston's younger brother, who finally broke the tension. I hadn't seen him in years, not since the early days of our arrangement, when he had been mildly curious about our odd, contract-bound marriage. But now, I found myself calling him, desperate for perspective. I needed someone to tell me if I was losing my mind, or if Weston had always been more than he let on. Marcus agreed to meet at a quiet cafe, far from prying eyes. When I arrived, he was already there, fidgeting with a cup of coffee, his eyes darting toward the door every time it opened. "Claire," he said when he saw me, "you look exhausted." "You have no idea," I whispered, sliding into the seat across from him. "I need to understand him, Marcus. I need to know why he did what he did, why he withheld everything for so long." Marcus leaned back, studying me carefully. "Weston doesn't open up easily," he said. "He's good at hiding what he feels, even from the people closest to him. And I think part of him didn't know how to separate what he owed your family from what he wanted for himself." I shook my head. "But 10 years of pretending, of distance, of control. How could he expect me to live like that?" Marcus's expression softened. "Because he thought it was the only way to protect you. He's complicated, loyal to a fault, but afraid of his own heart. He didn't think he deserved to want anything that wasn't earned, especially with your father's debt looming over both of you." I felt my chest tighten. The explanation didn't absolve him, but it offered a glimpse of something I hadn't allowed myself to see: vulnerability. And that vulnerability, fragile and hidden, was terrifying. When I returned home that evening, Weston was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. He didn't look up when I walked in, his movement steady, precise. I could hear the quiet chopping of vegetables, the hiss of the pan heating on the stove. I stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure if I had the courage to speak. Finally, I said, "We need to talk." He turned then, meeting my eyes. There was no defense, no calculated restraint, just a brief flash of something raw. "About what?" he asked, though his tone betrayed him. "About us. About everything." He nodded, motioning toward the table. "Sit." I did, though my hands trembled as I folded them in my lap. "I've been thinking about what you said," I began. "About how some of the moments weren't part of the contract. About how you cared." His jaw tightened. "I did care," he admitted. "Even when I told myself I couldn't. Even when I tried to push it away. And I still do. In my own way." I blinked, struggling to process the words. "In your own way?" "In the way I can," he said quietly. "I don't know how to express it properly. I'm not good at it. I've spent 10 years being everything but what I wanted to be with you." The vulnerability in his voice made my chest ache. 10 years of anger, confusion, and quiet longing all collided in that moment. "And now?" I asked. "What happens now that the contract ends?" He exhaled slowly, as if the weight of his own thoughts threatened to crush him. "I don't know," he said. I've spent so long thinking in terms of duty, obligation, and repayment that I forgot what it means to act on desire. But I do know one thing. I can't just walk away without telling you the truth, without facing what we've been through. The honesty, fragile and raw, filled the space between us. For the first time, I felt a shift, a subtle, dangerous shift, the kind that could either heal years of pretense or shatter what little stability remained. I don't know if I can forgive you, I whispered, or even understand what I'm supposed to feel. You don't have to understand yet, he replied. You just have to listen. And maybe, when you're ready, you can decide what you want to do next. We sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that isn't empty but charged with unspoken words and emotions too heavy to articulate. I realized then that everything I thought I knew about love, about marriage, about loyalty, was being rewritten in real time. The man across from me, the husband I had resented and feared, was more complex, more human, and more present than I had allowed myself to see. As the evening wore on, we began to talk in fragments, stories from the past, memories we had shared, the quiet gestures that had meant something to both of us, even if neither had admitted it. And somewhere in those conversations, the first thread of understanding formed. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation yet, but the beginnings of recognition, that even amid deception, fear, and obligation, something genuine had existed between us. By the time I went to bed that night, the house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heater. I lay awake, thinking about the days ahead, about the choices I had to make, about the man I had married out of necessity but had lived with in ways that felt deeper than duty. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I understood that truth wasn't just about contracts or debts. It was about confronting the emotions that had been buried and deciding, finally, whether to honor them or walk away. And I realized that walking away would no longer be simple. The following week was a blur of muted mornings and restless nights. The house felt like a stage, the walls heavy with the ghosts of conversations we hadn't had, moments we hadn't shared. Every glance between Weston and me was loaded with meaning, but also with hesitation. He moved around me carefully, as though I might shatter if touched too firmly. I could feel the tension radiating from him, the weight of 10 years of silence finally pressing against the fragile truce we had maintained. I started keeping a journal again, something I hadn't done since college. I wrote feverishly, pouring out the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to consume me: anger, betrayal, lingering hope, confusion. Writing became my only outlet for clarity. Every word was a lifeline to myself, a way to map the emotional landscape I had been trapped in for a decade. I wrote about the way Weston looked at me sometimes, the fleeting softness in his eyes, the way he would occasionally linger, near me, as if drawn by a gravity he didn't allow himself to acknowledge. I wrote about the warmth that had slowly crept into the corners of our home despite the arrangement, and the sudden fear that acknowledging it might be the first step toward devastation. Then, one evening, Marcus called. I hadn't spoken to him since our last cafe meeting, but his voice on the phone was calm and measured, carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. "Claire," he said, "I think you need to see something. Something you should know before the contract ends." "What is it?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound. "It's about Weston," he said simply, "and the debts, and your father. Can you come over?" I agreed immediately, and within an hour, I was at his townhouse. The city streets were slick with rain, the kind of cold drizzle that sinks into your bones. I held my coat tightly around me, my thoughts spiraling. What could Marcus possibly have that I didn't already know? I had spent years uncovering pieces of this life, threading together fragments of truth and deception. And yet, I felt certain that whatever he had would change everything. Marcus greeted me at the door, his expression unreadable. "Claire," he said, ushering me in. "Sit." He handed me a folder. Inside were bank statements, letters, contracts, documents I had never seen before. My hands trembled as I sifted through them, each page revealing details about my father's debts and Weston's involvement that I hadn't imagined. My father hadn't just owed money. He had been on the brink of losing everything, and Weston had stepped in to stabilize it all. Not out of cruelty, not out of greed, but because he had promised to protect me. I looked up at Marcus, my eyes wide. "He did this for me?" I whispered, disbelief and anger mingling. Marcus nodded. "Yes, and more than that, he stayed with you for 10 years because he felt obligated. But somewhere along the way, he also cared, deeply, in ways he couldn't admit even to himself." I sat back, absorbing the weight of his words. 10 years of pretending, 10 years of silent devotion, and yet he had never allowed himself to be fully present. And all this time, I had believed I was living in a lie, when in fact, the truth was far more complicated. When I returned home that night, Weston was in the living room, reading. The soft lamplight painted shadows across his face, highlighting the lines of fatigue I had never noticed before. I didn't speak immediately. I just stood there, watching him, trying to decide how to begin. Finally, I said, "We need to talk." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. There was a hesitation there, a pause that spoke volumes. "About?" he asked. "About everything," I said, moving to sit across from him. "The contract. My father, you, me, this house. Our life." Weston's expression softened, though he still maintained that careful reserve. "Claire, I don't know if I can explain everything. I've spent 10 years trying to hold back emotions I wasn't allowed to feel, trying to be the husband I was supposed to be, and not the one I wanted to be." I reached for his hand, and for a moment, he didn't pull away. "Then tell me," I whispered. "Tell me what you really feel." He exhaled slowly. "I cared for you, more than I thought possible, more than I had the right to. And I tried to show it in ways I thought were safe. But I was always afraid. Afraid that if I let myself feel too much, it would ruin everything." The words cut through me, sharp and unexpected. 10 years of distance, of silence, of restrained gestures, had been fueled by fear. And now, finally, he admitted it. Finally, he let me see the man beneath the contract, beneath the walls he had built around himself. I felt a tremor of emotion rise within me, a mix of relief, sorrow, and a tentative hope. "So, what now?" I asked softly. "The contract ends in a week. Everything we've built, does it all just end?" Weston hesitated. "I don't know. I've spent so long thinking in terms of obligation that I forgot how to think about what I want. But I do know I can't walk away without being honest, without facing what we've been through." And in that moment I realized the truth. The past 10 years, with all their complexities, betrayals, and silent sacrifices, had brought us here. And what came next would not be dictated by contracts or debts, but by the raw, fragile, and undeniable reality of our emotions. We sat together in silence, the clock ticking softly in the background, each of us grappling with the weight of confession, the precariousness of revelation, and the uncertain path forward. The life we had built, the home we had shared, the moments of quiet care, all of it hung in the balance. And for the first time in a decade, I understood that the story of our marriage was not yet finished. It was only beginning to be written, in the language of truth, courage, and perhaps, for the first time, love. The week passed slowly, each day stretching into the next, like a drawn-out confession. The house was quiet in a way that was almost suffocating, yet every corner seemed charged with the weight of unsaid words. Weston and I moved around each other carefully, navigating the remnants of 10 years of obligation and pretense. The more I observed him, the more I noticed the subtle shifts, moments of hesitation, glances that lingered too long, touches that were brief but deliberate. It was as if the contract had created invisible rails guiding our behavior, and now, with the terms about to expire, We were both stepping cautiously into unknown territory. One evening, Lucas came home from school, unusually silent. The boy, who had once been full of energy and curiosity, now walked with a slumped posture, his backpack swinging heavily against his back. I felt my heart tighten. I knew the last week's tension had seeped into him, even if he couldn't articulate it yet. I knelt to meet his eyes. "How was school today, sweetie?" I asked softly. Lucas hesitated, then muttered, "Fine." His voice was small, almost swallowed by the space between us. I knelt beside him on the sofa, placing my hand on his shoulder. "You know you can tell me anything, right? Even the things you're scared to say." He looked at me for a long moment, and then, almost reluctantly, he whispered, "Mom, is Dad really my dad?" My chest seized. This was the question I had feared the most, the one I had delayed answering, thinking time might soften it. But the moment had arrived, and there was no avoiding it. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the torrent of emotion I knew would follow. "Lucas, he's been part of your life for 10 years, and he loves you, in his own way. But there are things you should know about the past, about why your family's life was complicated, and why sometimes adults make decisions that are hard to understand." Lucas stared at me, wide-eyed, trying to absorb the weight of my words. I could see the fear, the confusion, the flicker of betrayal in his expression. My heart broke. I had promised myself I would protect him from the full truth until he was ready, but it seemed he was ready now, or perhaps he had no choice. That night, after tucking Lucas into bed, I found Weston in the study, flipping through documents. He looked up when I entered, his expression guarded but not hostile. "Claire," he said softly, "we need to talk about what's happening with Lucas. I don't want him to be caught in the middle of everything." I nodded, the tears I had been holding back threatening to spill. "I know, but he deserves to know the truth in some way, to understand that the years weren't a lie entirely, that you weren't just pretending." Weston's gaze dropped. "I don't know how to explain it to him, or to you for that matter. I spent so long hiding what I felt, I don't even know what I truly want anymore." "I don't either," I admitted, my voice trembling. "But I do know one thing. We can't go on pretending everything is fine. Not for Lucas, not for us." For the first time in years, there was no pretense between us. No contract to hide behind. No obligation to dictate our actions. Just two adults, exhausted by a decade of lies, staring at the possibility of truth. Weston reached out, hesitated, and then placed his hand over mine. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of unspoken years of silent caring, of restrained emotion, of moments that had felt fleeting but were somehow permanent. The next morning, I sat with Lucas at the kitchen table, watching him eat breakfast in near silence. The boy's mind was clearly elsewhere, processing the revelations I had begun to share in fragments. I decided to try a different approach, speaking gently but honestly. "Lucas," I said, "sometimes adults make decisions because they think they're protecting the people they love. Your father, he made choices that were complicated, but he loves you, and he's always been part of your life for a reason." Lucas's fork paused mid-air. "Even if he wasn't really my dad?" he asked quietly. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Even then," I said, "because love isn't just about blood. It's about care and presence, and the choices we make to be there for someone, no matter what." He nodded slowly, digesting the words, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. It wasn't complete forgiveness, nor a full comprehension of the past, but it was a start. And in that moment, I realized that the hardest part of this journey wasn't the betrayal or the deception. It was rebuilding trust in a way that would withstand the weight of all we had endured. Later that evening, Weston and I faced each other in the living room, the air thick with anticipation. "I think we need to be honest," I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind inside me, "about what we want. about what we feel, and about the life we want after the contract ends. He nodded slowly, his eyes dark with emotion. I agree, he said. I've spent 10 years trying to deny what I felt, but I can't do that anymore. I don't know what the future holds, Claire, but I do know that I don't want to walk away without trying. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe in the possibility of something real, not a contract, not a debt, not a transaction, but a life shaped by choice and truth. The fear and the anger were still there, raw and unhealed, but beneath them was something else, a fragile hope, tentative and unsteady, but alive. We spent hours talking that night, untangling the web of emotions and obligations that had bound us for a decade. We revisited memories, acknowledged moments of betrayal, and confessed the ways we had hurt each other. It was painful, excruciating, and yet, beneath the hurt, there was a sense of liberation. For the first time, we were no longer playing roles dictated by others. We were two people, exposed and vulnerable, facing the truth together. By the end of the conversation, exhaustion pulled at us both, but so did a strange sense of possibility. We had no guarantees, no promises of a perfect future. But we had something far more powerful: honesty, and the courage to confront the past without hiding behind it. And as I lay in bed that night, I realized that the hardest part of 10 years of deception had passed. The next challenge was learning to live, truly and fully, with the truth and with each other. The days after our long conversation passed in a strange, delicate rhythm. The tension that had built over a decade didn't disappear overnight, but it shifted. There was an honesty between Weston and me now, raw and unpolished, that made everything feel new and terrifying at the same time. I found myself watching him, noticing the small things, the way he furrowed his brow when concentrating, the way he paused before speaking as if measuring each word against some invisible standard. And I realized that 10 years of pretending had created habits that were hard to break for both of us. Lucas, too, was changing. He was quieter, more contemplative, but there were moments when his curiosity and warmth broke through, reminding me of the boy he had always been beneath the confusion. One afternoon, he came to me with a notebook filled with sketches of our home, our family, and even pictures of Weston and me together. "Mom," he said, "I drew us like we're really together, not just pretending." My heart ached at the simplicity of his words. In his drawings, there was no contract, no debt, no obligation, just a family. And for the first time in 10 years, I allowed myself to imagine what that could mean for us. Could we be a real family, not because of necessity, but because we chose to be? Weston seemed to sense the shift too. He began staying home more often, though still carefully, still deliberately. His presence no longer carried the weight of a contract, but something softer, tentative, as if he were testing the waters of a life he had never allowed himself to envision. One evening, as we cooked dinner side by side, our hands brushed, and I didn't pull away. He looked at me, eyes wide with surprise, and for a fleeting moment, the walls between us dissolved. "I didn't expect this," he said quietly, almost to himself. "This feeling?" "Neither did I admitted. "But maybe it's worth exploring." He nodded, but his expression held a trace of fear. "I've spent 10 years living within the boundaries of duty and obligation. I don't know how to navigate us, how to feel without rules, without contracts." "I don't either," I said softly, "but we'll figure it out, together." The words felt heavy with promise, fragile but determined. And in that moment, I realized that rebuilding our relationship wouldn't be easy. The scars of 10 years of deception and restraint were still there, beneath the surface, ready to flare up at the smallest provocation. But for the first time, the possibility of connection felt real. Not a performance, not a strategy, something living, breathing, and uncertain. Over the next few days, I found myself reflecting on the past decade with new eyes. I remembered the small gestures that had seemed meaningless at the time, the way Weston had remembered my favorite coffee, the way he had fixed a broken chair without being asked, the quiet presence he maintained when my father was gravely ill. Now, those moments took on a new significance. They were no longer just contractual acts, they were glimpses of a man who had struggled to reconcile obligation with genuine care. But there were still moments of tension, reminders that the past couldn't simply be erased. Arguments erupted over trivial matters, fueled by years of pent-up resentment and fear. A misplaced dish, a forgotten errand, a tone of voice too sharp, each incident threatened to unravel the fragile trust we were building. And yet, even in those moments, there was a difference. We argued with honesty, not pretense. We expressed frustration, not manipulation. And slowly, imperceptibly, the walls between us began to crumble. One evening, as rain streaked the windows, Lucas came into the living room, clutching a drawing of our family. "Mom," he said, "I think Dad really does care about us. I can see it now." Weston, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, looked about, at the boy with a mixture of surprise and vulnerability. "Lucas," he said, his voice soft, "I care, more than you know, and I always have." The moment was small, almost insignificant, but it carried the weight of a decade. Lucas beamed, and I felt a warmth spread through me that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the satisfaction of a contract fulfilled or a debt repaid. It was the simple, unforced joy of connection, the kind that only comes when truth is allowed to breathe. That night, as Weston and I sat in the quiet of the living room, the rain pattering against the windows, I realized something profound. The past 10 years had been a crucible, forging us in ways we hadn't understood at the time. We had been forced into proximity, forced into cooperation, forced into roles that neither of us had chosen. And yet, within that crucible, something genuine had emerged, fragile, imperfect, and beautiful. "I don't want to go back to the way things were," I said softly, breaking the silence. "Neither do I," he replied, his voice steady. "I don't know exactly what comes next, but I want to find out with you." I nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and exhilaration. It wouldn't be easy. We would stumble, we would falter, we would confront the remnants of the past. But for the first time, there was no pretense, no obligation, no contract to bind us. We were free to build something real, free to explore the uncharted territory of our hearts. And in that freedom, I felt a sense of possibility I hadn't known I could feel in years. Love, I realized, didn't always arrive in neat packages or convenient timelines. Sometimes it arrived through hardship, through struggle, through the painstaking work of understanding, forgiveness, and courage. And sometimes it arrived when you least expected it, in a house that had been both a prison and a sanctuary, in a man who had been both stranger and partner, in a child who taught you the meaning of truth. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the rhythmic breathing of Weston and the soft sighs of Lucas in the other room, I felt a cautious optimism stirring within me. The past decade had been shaped by obligations, sacrifices, and secrets, but it had also been filled with moments of care, resilience, and the quiet emergence of genuine connection. And now, finally, the possibility of a future built on truth, choice, and mutual respect seemed within reach. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel bound by the past. I didn't feel like a pawn in someone else's arrangement. I felt like myself, a woman who had endured, who had loved, who had survived, and who was finally ready to embrace the unpredictable, uncharted future ahead. The morning sunlight spilled into the house, soft and golden, and for the first time in years, it felt like a new beginning, rather than a reminder of the life we had endured. Weston and I were quiet in the kitchen, preparing breakfast side by side, without the invisible walls that had governed us for a decade. The air was different now, lighter, tentative, but alive with possibility. Lucas bounced in and out, animated, talking about his school projects and friends. his laughter filling spaces that had once felt heavy with silence. I looked at Weston as he poured coffee into our mugs, the casual intimacy of the moment striking me with unexpected force. He caught my gaze and smiled, small and uncertain, but real. It wasn't the smile of a man performing duty. It was the smile of someone finally allowed to feel what he wanted to feel. And for a moment, the weight of 10 years of pretense, obligations, and hidden truths seemed to lift. We talked that morning not about contracts, debts, or obligations, but about us, about our lives, about the kind of family we wanted to be. It was strange, navigating this new terrain where honesty replaced pretense and choices replaced arrangements. There was fear, yes, fear of repeating mistakes, fear of missteps, fear of old habits resurfacing, but there was also a fragile excitement, a sense of agency that neither of us had fully experienced in years. Lucas bounded in with a drawing he had made, handing it to us eagerly. "Look," he said. "This is our real family now. Not pretending, not fake, just us." I looked at Weston, who took the drawing gently, a rare softness in his eyes. "It's perfect," he said, his voice quiet, reverent. "Exactly like us." The simplicity of that moment struck me the way truth and choice could redefine what had once felt rigid and predetermined. 10 years of acting, pretending, and surviving under the weight of a contract had brought us here, to a place where authenticity was possible. And as we sat together, holding Lucas's drawing, I realized something profound. Love had survived. Not untouched, not unscarred, but present, resilient, and capable of growing, even after years of strain. Later that afternoon, we went through the final legal steps to close the chapter on the contract that had defined so much of our lives. The lawyer's office was stark and impersonal, but the act itself felt symbolic, a severing of the artificial bonds that had held us together, leaving only the truth of our choices. Weston and I sat side by side, holding hands as the papers were signed, feeling the quiet weight of release, and an unspoken promise that what came next would be governed by heart, not obligation. Back home, the house felt different, alive in a way it hadn't in years. The walls seemed to breathe with us, holding the echoes of 10 years of struggle, but also the beginnings of something new. Weston cooked dinner while Lucas did homework at the table, and I watched them, feeling a mixture of wonder and gratitude. We were not perfect, not yet, but we were real. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, Weston and I sat on the porch, silent but connected. The world outside moved on, oblivious to the quiet triumphs within our home. But in that moment, it felt monumental. I could feel the depth of what we had endured, the sacrifices, the lies, the fear, and the courage it had taken to confront it all. And yet, beneath that weight, there was a new kind of lightness, the freedom to be ourselves, together, without the chains of expectation or obligation. "Claire," Weston said softly, breaking the silence, "I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if we'll always get it right. But I do know that I want to be here, with you, with Lucas, truly here." I took his hand, feeling the warmth and solidity of his touch, and nodded. "I want that too," I said. "No contracts, no obligations, just us, choosing to be together every day, for the first time in 10 years. The truth, raw and unvarnished, had finally emerged from the shadows. It had been messy, painful, and heartbreaking, but it had survived. And now it had the power to guide us, to shape a life that was no longer dictated by debts or duty, but by choice, love, and the courage to be vulnerable. Lucas joined us on the porch, leaning against Weston with a shy smile. "Can we always be like this?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I whispered, hugging him tightly. "We will be, because this is our choice, and nothing else matters." As night fell and the stars emerged, I realized the journey had not been about perfection or certainty. It had been about endurance, truth, and the willingness to confront fear and vulnerability head-on. Weston and I had been bound by necessity, but we had discovered something far more enduring: the ability to choose each other freely despite the scars of the past. And in that choice, I found a profound sense of peace. 10 years of acting, pretending, and surviving had brought us to this moment, not to erase the past, but to embrace it, to learn from it, and to step forward into a life that was ours and ours alone. I looked at Weston, then at Lucas, then at the house that had witnessed our struggles, our secrets, and our slow, painful transformation. And I knew, finally, that the story of the past decade was not a tale of loss or betrayal, but one of resilience, courage, and the quiet, transformative power of truth. Love, I realized, doesn't always arrive on time. Sometimes it is hidden, complicated, buried beneath layers of fear, obligation, and sacrifice. But it survives. And when it does, it has the power to rebuild, to redeem, and to illuminate even the darkest corners of the heart. I reached out and held Weston's hand, squeezing gently. "We survived," I said softly, "and now we can finally live." He nodded, his eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. Yes, finally we can live. And in that quiet, unassuming moment, I understood the ultimate truth of our story, that even amid betrayal, fear, and pretense, love can endure, transform, and finally find its way home. In the end, we lost the facade, but we found each other. Love doesn't die in betrayal. It transforms, and so did I. Thank you for following our story, a journey full of emotions. If this story touches your heart, please like the video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more deeply touching stories every day.